two distinct phases to any design. The first is a conceptual phase where we decide how big something's going to be in its overall form. The second phase is the engineering phase where we figure out what size the parts are and how they fit together. In addition, SketchUp is also very efficient for making changes, which is something that always occurs. Let's start by making a bookcase to show you how this works. I'm going to take the rectangle tool and just establish a footprint. I want to be 32 inches wide and 12 inches deep. So I started the rectangle, I typed the dimensions in separated by a comma, and I hit the enter key. Then by typing P, I engage the push-pull tool, bring it up to 60 inches. Well, now I have the basic box. This shows me what the form of the bookcase is going to look like. I'd like to add a face frame to it. So I want to come in 1.5 inches from all the outside edges. The offset tool will do that for me. It's over here on the toolbar. And that creates a face either inside or outside an existing one. So I click on the edge, I begin to pull the cursor in, I type in 1.5 and hit enter, and that establishes the face frame. Now I can see that I don't really like the look of it being equally sized all the way around. I'd like to make the bottom rail and the top rail wider. If I select this line, type M to get the move tool engaged, click on a point and drag up, I can type in the number 3, and now I have a wider rail at the bottom of the face frame. I'll do the same thing at the top. I'll select the line, type M for move, and I'll pull that down 2 inches. This establishes the look of the face frame for the cabinet. Now I'm going to add some shelves. I'd like my shelves to be 12 inches apart. So again, I'll select this line at the bottom of the face frame. I'll type M to get the move tool engaged, and I'll press the control key to make a copy. I'll click on this point, start to drag up on the blue axis, type in 1, 2, and hit enter, and I have that line 12 inches above the first one. Now to make the shelf 3/4 inches thick, it's already selected. I already have the move tool. I can just hit the control key again. You'll see the little plus sign appear next to the move tool. Click on the end of the line, drag up, type 0.75, and hit enter to create the edge of the shelf. To make additional shelves, I'll select both edges. I'll type M for the move tool again, hit control to make a copy. This time I'm going to click from the bottom edge of the bottom of the bookcase up to the top of the first shelf. I'll click again to end it, and this repeats the spacing that I had. Now if I type 3x and hit enter, it makes a total of 3 copies. And I can see that the spacing I originally had planned on isn't going to work. I'm not really sure if I want to keep my bookcase at 60 inches high and only have 3 shelves, or if I want to go a little higher so I can have 4. So I'm going to select the entire bookcase, use the move copy tool to make a copy. I'll create 2 copies so I can compare the different versions. On this one I'm going to use a left to right selection box, and I'm going to grab everything on the top of the cabinet. I'm going to click M to start the move tool, and I'm clicking at the top of the top shelf. I start, move on the blue axis, type in 12, and hit enter. With the tape measure I can check and see that I went 1 inch too far. So I can grab everything again with the move tool, start, come back down 1 inch, and hit enter. Over on the shorter one, I want to move this top line down to be even with the bottom line of the top shelf. So I'll erase this line I don't need by selecting it and hitting the delete key. I'll grab all the geometry at the top of the model. I'll start the move tool and simply come down and snap on the end of this line. So I can zoom out and I can compare the two bookcases side by side. If I want a numerical dimension, I can come over to the toolbar and select the dimension tool, click one point at the top of the cabinet, a second point in line with it at the bottom, and drag a dimension off to the side to see the overall size. In comparison, the dimension tool is still active, so I can see that I've got 71 versus 58 1/4. To get a sense of scale, I can go to the Components window and drag a component of a person in. This will give me a perspective of which height is going to work better for my situation. Now that I don't need her anymore, I can let her go. And I think I'm going to work with a shorter height. So all of this isn't needed and it can be deleted. I want to establish the depth of the shelves, so I'm going to take these faces and push them into the model with the push-pull tool. I can reach push-pull up here on the toolbar, or I can simply type in the letter P to get it going. So I'll come in 11 1/4 inches, type that dimension in and hit enter. Now for the rest of them, I can just double click and push-pull will repeat the dimension that I had. In just a few minutes, I've established the overall height, the dimensions, the size of my face frame, the depth of my shelves. One of the keys to working efficiently in SketchUp is to draw as little as possible. I have a model here that's all stuck together. I want to make another one where all the parts are individual components. I could use the tape measure, figure out the size of the cabinet side, and redraw it. But it's a lot faster to simply copy the parts I need and make those into components. With the Move and Copy tool, I make a copy of the side off to the side of the model. I'll use push-pull to make it 3/4 inch thick. I'm also going to push the front edge back 3/4 inch to accommodate the thickness of the face frame. I want to have a rabbet on the back edge to accommodate the cabinet back. So I'll copy this line. I'll come in 3/4 inch. Then I can zoom in and use push-pull to establish the rabbet. I'll make it a 1/2 inch deep. With those things established, I'll select the entire side, right-click, and make it a component. Whenever you make a component, you want to make sure that this box that says Replace Selection with Component is selected. I'll do a similar operation to make the face frame component. I'll click on the face, I'll make a copy of it over to the side of the original model. Now this is all one face, and when I copy a face, the lines surrounding the face come with it. I'm going to add some new lines with the pencil tool to separate the rail and the style. And I'll do the same thing over on the other side. That establishes these pieces as separate parts. Now that I've added the lines to make the face frame parts separate parts, I'll use push-pull and make them 3/4 inch thick. You may notice these little lines here. Those are remnants of the shelves from the original model. I'll use those in a moment. The next thing I want to do is to isolate this style. So I'll select it all with a bounding box. I'll right click and I'll make it a component. I type in the name, I check the box that says replace selection with component, and I click create. Now the style is one entity in the model. I'll do the same thing with the rails. I'll use push pull. I'll snap on the point that's already there rather than typing in a dimension. I'll select the rail and make it a component. Make sure to check the box and click create. I'll repeat that operation down at the bottom and make the bottom rail a component. And again, I want to make sure this box is checked. So now my face frame, instead of being a bunch of individual lines and faces, is three objects: the style and the two rails. When I build the cabinet, I want to set the shelves into dados in the cabinet side. Again, all the information I need, the spacing, is over here, and I could measure and redraw. I also have that same information available over here as the remnants of the lines on the other style. So I'm extruding this out to a 10.5 inch width, which should match the inside of the cabinet side. And now I'm just going to copy these lines, holding down the shift key so I can select them all. With the move and then the control to make a copy, I'm clicking on this bottom corner. Now I'm placing that on the bottom corner of the cabinet side. That copied the lines to the new location. So that quickly establishes where the dados are going to be. The problem is these lines are individual elements, and the cabinet side is a component. I can't really use them as they are. I need to right click, select edit component from the menu, and then I can put the lines into the cabinet side. In this case, I will need to draw, but SketchUp will let me click on the lines that are outside of the component. Then I can push pull that face, make a dado that's 1/4 inch deep. Now I can take these two lines and I can make multiple copies of them in the locations that I need. Simply clicking, and then after each click I hit the control key again, and that establishes that I'm going to make a copy. I'll zoom in and out. Remember to hit the control key, a start point and a stop point. If I remember. Now I can just use push-pull, and by double-clicking, push-pull remembers the last dimension that I extruded to, and that's 1/4 inch. So I'll just come in and out. Once I've established all the dados for my shelves, I can come around and make sure they're where I want them, zoom out, and then just click out in space to close the component. I don't need this anymore, so I'll simply erase that. Now I can move my cabinet side into position at the back of the face frame. So I click on the component, simply move it over from one point to another. The lines I copied to make the shelves are still existing out in space here, So I'll select them and hit the delete key to remove them. To continue on with making the model, I can make a copy of the style, move it from the left side to the right side of the cabinet. When I have it in place, I'll right click and select Flip Along from the component's red to change its orientation. I'll do the same thing with the cabinet side using Move and Copy. I'll place it on the other side of the cabinet, move it into position, then right click, and with Flip Along I'll make a mirror image. Now I need to create some shelves, and when I come around I find that I've lost some faces on the face frame components. I'll need to do a little cleaning up here. So I'll select the component, I'll right click, open it for editing, then I'll draw in a new line. That recreates the face for me. I'll do the same thing with the bottom rail component, open it up for editing, make the new face. And lastly, I'll do that with the top rail. Now to open it for editing, I can either right click, select Edit Component from the menu, or I can simply double click on the component. Now that I've made that correction, I can continue on and make the shelves. I'm going to orbit and pan around so I get a good look at where the bottom of the bookcase ought to be. With the rectangle tool, I'm going to click on the ends of the dados that I created, zoom in to get the correct point. Now that I have that face established, I'm just going to use push-pull and make it the length of the cabinet side after the rabbit. Now I can select the bottom and make it into a component. I'm going to call this fixed shelf because the bottom and the shelves are the same size. Make sure the box is checked and click Create. With the bottom in place, I can make copies of that and position them in the remaining dados. Now when I make a copy or when I move, I want to be careful that I pick a point that I can repeat when I pick the component up. So I'm grabbing it from the corner, this specific corner. I'm hitting the Control key to make a copy. Then I'm hitting the same corner of the next dado. I'll do that one more time. In this case, the more convenient point to grab is down at the bottom. And now I have the other elements of the cabinet complete and in place. I use the shelf component to make the top, but now that I take a close look at it, that isn't exactly what I need. Instead of redrawing this or recreating it, I can take this component, make it into a new one by selecting it, right-clicking, and then selecting Make Unique from the menu. Make Unique creates a copy of the component with a new name. It's now called Fixed Shelf 1. I can change the name up in this window just by highlighting and typing in the new name. That'll bring in an extra copy I don't need. I'll just hit delete to remove that. Now when I come in, I can edit this without changing the other shelves. So I'm going to use push-pull to bring it out to match the depth of the side. I'll use move and copy to come up and create a rabbet on the back of the cabinet top. And now that I have the top the way I want it, I see that I've left a hole in the side. Now this is a lot easier to fix in SketchUp than it is in real life. So I can zoom in, click on the cabinet side component, select Edit, add in this part. I'll push-pull to add that section. Then I'll select and delete these unwanted lines. I check it out. That's the way I want the side to appear. Now because this is a component, in addition to changing the one on the first side of the cabinet, the opposite side also changed. So now the only remaining piece to make for this is the back. I want the back of this bookcase to fit within the rabbets in the sides and the top and end at the bottom of the bottom shelf. Instead of doing a lot of math and figuring and drawing it somewhere else, I'm going to draw the back component in place and then move it and change it where I want it. I'll take the rectangle tool by typing the letter R. I'll come in and snap on this corner. I'll zoom out, then zoom back in, and I'm going to take the bottom of the cabinet at this point. I want the back to be a 1/2 inch thick, so I'll use push-pull to extrude it to 1/2 inch thickness. Now that isn't quite where I want it, but it's very close. At this point, I'm going to orbit around so I can select the back, right-click, and make it a component. Type in the name, make sure the box is checked, and click Create. Now that the back is a component, and I have it moved in place, I can edit it to move the bottom up into the position that I want. So I'll change my point of view a little bit, select push-pull, then I can move the bottom edge up until it's on the edge of the bottom. Now that I have the size of the back established and in a proper position, I can zoom and pan around, make sure it's the size that I want. Then I can come around and take a look at the front of the cabinet. So in just a few moments, I've gone from a conceptual model that's all stuck together to one where all the parts are components, and I know the exact sizes of each and every one of those. The next step, I'm going to add some molding to the top and the bottom of the cabinet. We'll use the Follow Me tool to create the molding around the top of the bookcase. We'll come around, orbit around to the back, and establish the profile first. I want a molding with a cove in it, but the first thing I want to do is establish the overall size. So I'll draw a box 1 inch by 2.5 inches, and that'll create a face to draw the profile on. In some instances, You might think it would be faster to use the rectangle tool, but rectangles can be difficult to draw vertically. So that's why I use the pencil tool to establish the face for the profile. I'll use the tape measure, bring in some guidelines, and we'll use those to create the profile for the molding. With the guidelines in place, I can draw other lines, snap them to the intersections on the guidelines. Now I'll take the arc tool and I'll click from the beginning point to the end point, and then finally in the middle to establish the curve. Now I can take the eraser and remove the lines that I don't need. This is a profile that's going to wrap around the cabinet. Now if I used push-pull, I could get it down one side, but I wouldn't be able to turn the corner. Instead of push-pull, I'm going to use the Follow Me tool. Now Follow Me can be a little tricky to use. Follow Me needs two things. It needs a face to extrude. It also needs a path to extrude around. It won't work on components such as the sides of the cabinets. So I'm going to take the pencil tool and I'm going to draw 3 lines around the sides and front of the bookcase to establish a path. Then I'll select the 3 lines and I'll also select the face. When I have all 3 selected, I'm going to right click and make a component. I give it a meaningful name, check that the replace selection box is clicked, and click create. Now I need to right click, select edit component, and I'm going to select the path for Follow Me first. When I do this, I only need to pick the Follow Me tool from the toolbar and click on the face, and that completes the extrusion. Now that went around the sides and the front of the cabinet. I want to do a little extra here so that when I get to the end, I'll be able to save the 3 parts of the molding as individual pieces. I'm also going to reverse the faces here just so it looks a little better in the finished model. The first step is to draw miter lines where the front and the sides intersect. I'll get one at the top and one at the bottom. I'll also do this on the underside of this surface. And I'll orbit around. I'll repeat the same thing on the other end. These lines will serve to separate the 3 pieces of molding. Now this is an extra step. It really isn't necessary, but it'll be helpful later on. It'll establish the exact lengths of each piece of molding that I need. So now that I have the miter lines in place, I'll orbit around. I'll select just one side of the molding. I'll right click and I'll make it a component. We'll call this top molding left. We'll check the replace box and click create. I'll come around and do the other side. Select all the geometry, right click, make it a component. Give it a name. check the box, click Create. Then I'll come around to the front. With my selection box, I'm getting the front piece, making that a component as well. Now what I've done is created a nested component. If I look at the components window and check the name, I have a component that's a single component, the top molding. But within this component are 3 other components for each piece. When I go to prepare my cut list, I'll be able to pull a single piece in, and I'll be able to get the length of the molding that I need. I don't really need that piece, so I'll get rid of it, close the components window, and zoom back out to the extents of my model. We'll add a molding around the base of the cabinet in a similar way. We'll come into a corner. We'll draw a face. This would establish the size of the piece of wood that we'd cut the molding from. One more line completes the face. I can make some guidelines. Let's come in 1/4 of an inch. Down the same amount. We'll come in 1/8 on this edge. And down 3/8 from there. Now I'll just draw lines on this existing face. Hit the escape key to stop drawing. Get that line established. Place an arc from endpoint to endpoint. Now down in the measurements window, arcs will be expressed as a bulge, which is the distance across the 2 points. That really isn't the terminology that we use. So I'm going to type 3/8 R, and that'll give me an arc that has a 3/8 inch radius. When I have that established, I'll erase the unneeded guidelines and the unneeded parts of the face. Again, I have the profile of the molding. Now I need to establish a path so that I can use follow me to extrude it around the base of the cabinet. And that path will simply be 3 lines. I'll come in to get the outside corner of the cabinet, zoom in and out to get the exact points that I want. Then I can back out. I'll select the 3 lines, hold down the Shift key so I can select them as a group. Then when I have the face selected, I'll right click, make it a component, call it base molding. The box is checked, so I click Create. Now I can right click, hit Edit Component. Again, I'll hold down the Shift key to select all 3 lines, grab the Follow Me tool, and then simply click on the face. With the extrusion complete, I still have the Edit Component window open, so I can take the Line tool, draw in the miter lines. Now I need another line on the inside, and I can't see it. I could orbit around to get to it. The other option I have is to go to the View menu, select Face Style, and X-ray. That lets me see through the model. Now I can take the Line tool, and I can actually draw behind a face that's in the way of what I want to draw. I'll come around to the other side, draw that line in. And in the X-ray view can get a little confusing, so I'll turn it off. Then come in and draw the other lines. Now that I've done that, I've created a separation between the three pieces. And I can select, if I draw the box correctly, just the side, make that a nested component, give it a name, check the box, come around to grab the front. Whoops. I clicked outside and I closed the component for editing, so I need to grab it again. Use a bounding box to select just the front piece, make it a component, and one more time on the right side. Now I have the base molding complete. It's one component, but it's composed of three other components, and that makes a nested component.